the organizations, what are the best practices you're recommending that they should look at? I mean, primarily from an AI truth perspective, you probably focus more on the fairness and bias. That's my guess. So I could be wrong. But what are your suggestions with respect to best practices?
No, I would say actually we focus on protecting some of these systems today, because and making sure they're robust and inclusive of a lot of information, of different types of information, which is still the case. I mean, really I can't come back to this point enough, because I really think it's going to emerge as a way to be to provide explainability and to provide that layer of purposefulness, as opposed to just feeding in all of the big generic models. I think we're going to start seeing a shift away from that, as people just aren't getting what they need out of their specific use case from the agentic models that are available today. I think we're just going to continue seeing that people are progressing with trying to focus on specific areas, like I am with women's health. They'll just keep trying to get more and more specific with how they represent those groups and the data that surrounds those groups, as opposed to making an all-purpose, agentic AI. Right now, I'm trying to build small ontologies for the way that women talk about their health, right? Because that's what we want to talk about. That's what we want to try to help them understand. There's a big difference between you going out and having a conversation with your best friend about making out or something versus you going to like WebMD and it explaining, what that's all about. You know what I'm saying? Like you're going to get the nitty-gritty details. And in different words, in different ontology, right? But there's a big difference between going to like a WebMD that I would consider to be more of like a big all-purpose built type of solution, right? You go out there, you want to query that one, and you want to find out some answers. Well, you're going to get very specific sets of information. And then over here, you're lacking that information. Where is that information? Is it even available? So I think this idea of having more purpose-built systems that focus less on very all-purposey types of things and more on specifics, specific use cases, for example, and specific targets that you're trying to achieve, and not just the predictive analytics based on I'm going to feed it in examples and then train it to spit out, whether or not other people look like that example. I think instead of that, we're going to see people moving away from that and trying to move more into this. Can I figure out a way to expand this group and really target in on what this problem is and then influence that? So like it can be anything from women's health targets to trying to open up financial markets for the unbanked to, but I think that the way forward is really starting to look at that whole approach, which is more of a causal AI approach. So.
Got it. So Hassan, again, right, you talked about in your discussion with the companies, you're talking about reasoning, you're talking about reason and explainability. So what are the best practices that you are suggesting as you talk to the companies?
Best practices, it would be something that's very subjective, very industry dependent, right? But in terms of just minimal things that you need to do, right? Because right now we're at that level of AI where you just need everyone needs to be doing something in order to ensure they're using it responsibly. And then the degrees to which companies do additional steps may vary. So just to kind of recap, I've talked a lot about theoretical, avenues of potential bias, things like that, architecture, RAG systems, even, training data that might be used to upend AI. But then when it comes to the practical nuts and bolts of this, what's really going to happen is this. You're going to have companies that are using Copilot, Microsoft's, right? And they're going to rely on the fact that Microsoft, has done certain amount of security testing, I presume. You're going to have companies that use just off-the-shelf open source models by Meta, right? Most of these companies, 99% I would say, are not designing their own models from scratch. So the question is, what do these types of companies do to operate responsibly? So to that, I would say at the minimum, they need to start documenting, right? So one standard that we've done a lot of implementation work for is ISO 42001. And this is actually, like, we have companies here in Canada as well that are getting, certified in the ISO 42001 standard from actual auditors that have worked with the likes of Cohere and other big companies.
Is it becoming a requirement, Hassan, this certification, or is it still an optional stage?
So it's not, there's no law that I'm aware of that says you have to get an ISO 42001. But the reason a company might do it is that, so just to give the audience a little bit of background, ISO 42001, similar to 27001 and 9001, if you've looked at ISO before, it's a management standard for AI systems. So what does that mean? It's like, if anyone's played with Legos as a kid, you remember that giant flat piece where you build all your other stuff on? ISO 42001 acts as like a foundational standard where you can basically add in other practices, standards, regulations, and sort of have that as kind of a way to manage your responsible AI operation, right? It's sort of that ecosystem that then you have different responsible AI components in. 42001, a large part of it is having awareness and documenting how you do responsible AI. So at Fairly, we've kind of boiled it down into 5 categories. How your company deals with AI at a societal level, so your various stakeholders, documenting them, making sure who is dealing with your systems and who is supplying your systems. Okay. Looking at it from the organizational level, so who are the people in your org that have competencies for dealing with AI systems? Who takes responsibility for AI outputs? Who's there to deal with an incident when it arises? Then you have the tooling, where it's anything that's not the data or the model itself, but you'll have things that like run the inference, right? Not everyone uses OpenAI's API calls, for example. You might have a model that's sitting on someone else's systems that your company pings, right? So those are the types of things you need to be aware of, because if there's a security issue in your tooling, there's a security issue in your actual systems. Then you have the models. What are the models? Where were they? Who are you getting them from? Are they modified, or are they just the stock models? And then you have the data. Is it private client data you're dealing with? Is it publicly accessible? Where is it coming from? What have you done to modify it? So these are the 5 levels. Once you just, at least at the minimum, start documenting these things, you then have an awareness of the different avenues by which fairness and bias issues can creep up. If you don't have it, and you kind of just have like this siloed view of your organization where one team has like one model running on a computer, and then another team is using Copilot, and another team is accidentally, leaking out company minutes on some sort of, free GPT server that they found on Google, it's going to be a mess, right? If at least you have these fundamental elements of documenting what your data is, where your models are, what systems you're using, how your organization is equipped, and then who you're dealing with in society, and what your responsibilities are, you're more in the direction of then being able to tackle questions of bias and fairness.